Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Park Summit series. My name is Tom Disco. I'm the advocacy manager at the Austin Parks Foundation. Very excited about this conversation that we have today about the budget. I want to spend a few moments unpacking the motivation behind this conversation before we allow our other panelists to introduce themselves, and then we dive in. I think it is as all of you are watching are probably aware, our country and our city are having unique and desperately needed conversations about the nature of justice in our community. And I think for many people, they assume that parks or the Parks Department don't have a place in that conversation, and APF does not believe that. We know that parks have an essential role to play in this conversation. So with that in mind, and with the City of Austin's budget conversation coming up starting next week, we wanted to do, instead of sort of a budget 101 conversation, a budget 202 conversation. How does parks funding actually translate into the outcomes that we want for our people in our community, and what is the role that the Parks Department plays in giving people better outcomes for their lives? So with that, we will start introducing our panel and dive into the conversation. So Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself, and we'll take it from there?
Hello, good evening. My name is Tiffany Cabin. I'm with the Austin Parks and Recreation Department, where I'm a division manager over our community outreach program, therapeutic recreation, and athletic programs.
Thanks. And Lucas, how about you?
Sure. Lucas Massey. I'm assistant director in the Austin Parks and Recreation Department. I've been with the department for about 20 years now. Have an undergraduate from the University of Texas in Youth and Community Studies and a master's in education from the University of Texas in sport management.
Great, thank you. And Andrew.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Hairston. I direct the School to Prison Pipeline Project at Texas Appleseed, recently rebranded as the Education Justice Project, where I have been for just over a year. Texas Appleseed is a public interest justice center that focuses on various social justice initiatives that I'll dive into more, and just honored to be here tonight.
Great. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Thanks to our viewers for joining us as well. And I think the School to Prison Pipeline is really sort of where this conversation for me started, of like, how do we do an event about the conversations that are happening in our community and how parks play a role. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we will be exploring what is the School to Prison Pipeline and what does that mean? And then how does the Parks Department play a role in preventing those types of outcomes, and the broader role in childcare and youth programming and the positive benefit that that brings to our community. So with that, Andrew, if you'd like to start your presentation, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. So again, it's such an honor to be here tonight with the Austin Parks Foundation and with the City of Austin representatives. We really are engaged in these critical conversations, as Tom said right now, about what our budget reflects as a moral document for our city and what this might hold for the next several years to come. So again, some more background on Texas Appleseed. We describe ourselves as a public interest justice center. We have been around since 1996. And our broad mission is to dismantle unjust laws and policies that unduly burden historically underserved Texans. And so through that broad mission, we're able to work across various program areas. In addition to education justice, we focus on fair financial services access, criminal justice reform, youth justice, and fair housing and disaster recovery and relief. And we primarily use legislative advocacy during the legislative sessions to advance our goals, but we also work with local communities across Texas to move the needle on these issues. So again, I appreciate our panelists for grounding us, especially Tom, on the School to Prison Pipeline. I think it's a very necessary conversation to be having, although it's been an ongoing one for decades. Broadly put, through the use of exclusionary discipline, such as suspensions, expulsions, and placements in alternative education, and then contact with school police officers on their campuses, so many kids are put into contact with the criminal legal system when they are in middle school or high school or even younger in some instances. And this certainly feeds the broader criminal legal system. So those kids who are identified as bad in school or as problem children will be continuously exposed to exclusionary discipline, continuously referred to law enforcement for their conduct, and then end up with records, criminal records, or entanglements with the criminal legal system. And of course, the school to prison pipeline disproportionately burdens kids who are Black, brown, LGBTQ, or living with disabilities. Quite harrowingly, there was a news article that circulated earlier this week from ProPublica that detailed how a young woman in Michigan, a 15-year-old Black girl, was sentenced to a juvenile detention center for not doing her virtual homework during this pandemic. And the judge used some justification that this young woman was a threat to her community. That egregious example is one not nearly as uncommon as you would think. And then two, really reflects how all of these systems play out. You're dealing with a lack of access to broadband. You're dealing with these historical versions of what folks think about young people and about young Black people, in particular these stereotypes, and then it leads to these entanglements where a young person is put into a detention center during the pandemic. It's quite awful. So I want to thank my colleague Chris Harris, who has worked with Tom before, for providing the avenue for this presentation this evening. So Chris directs our Criminal Justice Project, and again, I direct the Education Justice Project. And I think our projects, all of our program areas at Texas Appleseed are overlaid with one another and intersect, but especially the Criminal Justice and Education Justice Projects. So through the two projects, we focus on ending that exclusionary discipline that I mentioned, removing school police officers from campuses, ending the criminalization of poverty for our communities, and diverting funds from police into social services, which feels most relevant for our conversation this evening. And I want to mention in this time of revolutionary action and broader conversations around that action, we ground our work in these projects in particular in principles of prison industrial complex abolition. I think that's been much more introduced to the public discourse and the zeitgeist over the past several weeks. But it's generally the idea that policing and prisons do not keep young people and communities safe in the ways that they have been historically pitched to do. And there are other ways that we can reimagine safety that don't feed the prison industrial complex, that can deliver critical services for our communities. So again, I just want to ground us in this moment. It feels unparalleled in U.S. history. And I think there have been recent news reports to illustrate how this iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement may be the largest movement in U.S. history. This, again, reflects the decades-long work of community members and organizers who have been fighting against the prison industrial complex, who have been fighting against the school to prison pipeline, and saying, look, we don't need these institutions of policing and prisons and surveillance to secure safety for us and our children. And this is where we have arrived. The calls to defund the police have taken on major steam in places like Minneapolis and Seattle. You have school districts across the country at this point that have either voted to end their contracts with local police departments, as was done in Minneapolis after Mr. Floyd's death. But then you also have school districts like in Oakland entirely disbanding their school police departments. They had internal police departments that school boards have since voted to disband entirely. So we just want to continue to use the momentum of this moment, bring it to Austin, and really hold policymakers and elected officials accountable to this type of radical change. So kind of grounding this in recreation services, we on this call, these panelists certainly know, but I'm sure folks listening in know as well, the unique role in the life of American cities. Just having access to that outdoor space to take a break when you need it, to get to know your neighbors, to really get to familiarize yourself with your environment and with the natural surroundings that you find yourself in are very imperative. And in this moment, activists like Dr. Angela Davis, who has been leading the call for prison industrial complex abolition for years, has spoken about the necessity of calling for defunding the police and taking those funds and investing them in social and recreation services, whether they be education or parks and recreation services. And it's a fundamental belief, and it feels truer and truer as we understand the history of the United States and how we have arrived to this moment, that seeing that lack of investment in these services up to this point in favor of policing and having a shift in the direction of those social services and investment in them can really address some of the issues that lead or are laid bare by crime as we know it. And I think, as you'll see on this next slide, there have been some graphics created recently and some interesting budget tools that have been made by folks that are helping folks really engage in this conversation and visualize how defunding the police can lead to some really interesting innovation in our investments in community. So why I want to show y'all this thread on Twitter, 7 ways to reduce violent crime that don't include more policing. And this is by a group called the Prison Policy Initiative that we greatly respect. I want to point your attention to number 2, improve your neighborhood infrastructure. Improving investments in street lighting, painted crosswalks, public transportation, and parks have been shown to reduce the likelihood of violent crime. I think that's something important to ground ourselves in this moment. Then there's this resource, Defund Austin Police. It's held by a local organization called Grassroots Leadership, but is a collaborative effort by another group of nonprofits, the Austin Justice Coalition, if I'm not mistaken, and we're supporting this at Texas Appleseed, our criminal justice work. But you see how this website is contextualizing defunding the police, and it breaks down, are you familiar with prison industrial complex abolitionists? Is an idea that you support? Is it something that you've been introduced to recently and you'd like to ground yourself in more? And then 3, is this something that you think is ridiculous or that just does not sound very achievable to you? This website, through its resources, I think will break down how we get to this notion of defunding the police and really making sure that communities feel safe and grounded. And then last, I wanted to show this budget tool that's been used by folks. It'll probably ask you to enter your postal code when you do, but you'll see that the Austin Police Department currently has a $400 million budget allocation, probably about 40% of the operating budget of the city of Austin. And if you play with this tool, you can see how other investments can be increased, how you can make a budget that's balanced in your perspective to really secure community safety and public safety. And even if it's just taking several $1 million away from the police department and putting it toward other resources, you can see that many of the social services of Austin stand to benefit by this. So check those resources out at your leisure. And all of this is going toward really envisioning a new world. We think these calls to defund the police and increase investments in social services will pave the way to a world that has not yet existed, right? We so often rely on crime and punishment in prisons, and they are so embedded in our lexicon and in our vocabulary that we want to push for a world where we're thinking about harm that will inevitably occur from human to human, but thinking about different methods of accountability and repair of that harm that don't involve the carceral system, and that especially allow kids to be kids. And I'd say fundamentally at 30,000 foot view, that is where our work at Texas Appleseed lands us, is that we're trying to get policymakers to extend that grace and compassion to the youngest and the most vulnerable among us. And using these tangible opportunities like a collaboration with the Austin Parks Foundation, we want to increase awareness in social services and public parks and get to a place where empathy and our shared humanity stand in the place of so many rifts in our society that have led to such rampant inequality and oppression. So it's just, again, such an honor, I thank Tom and his team for the invitation. I'm very active on email, so you should be aligned personally on email. But also follow us on social media. We're at Texas Appleseed, fully spelled out on Twitter and Facebook. Texas Appleseed, TX Appleseed on Instagram. Please do follow us. We have, although we're working remotely, capabilities to access our office line. So shoot us a line through the phone if you're so inclined to our office line. And again, we look forward to this conversation as it unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Again, I will underscore, I think the perspective that Texas Appleseed has to offer, both in this context and many others, is invaluable. We're really happy that you could be here. And I will underscore your statement that this is a truly unique moment. I feel like as someone who can still remember my time in college and look back on it fondly, so many of the conversations that classmates of mine had around a Natty Light, keg in someone's basement in Pittsburgh about truly transformational policymaking that could happen that seems so distant, just so many, very few short years ago, are really happening. And one of the things that's been really exciting to me about being here at the Austin Parks Foundation is that I know that parks have a key role to play in that conversation, because again, it is this infrastructure for better outcomes for people's lives that I think has been overlooked for some time by people, right? We look, I think, traditionally at parks as sort of amenities, and I think we're coming to understand that parks are infrastructure for better outcomes. We know there is research out there that demonstrates that the closer one lives and grows up to a park, the less likely someone is to experience violent crime in their life. And I think a lot of people hear about studies like that and they immediately assume that it's because parks tend to be in more privileged parts of cities and in communities. And I can tell you from my short time at being at the Austin Parks Foundation that is not true. It's because people who live and are near to parks have a greater sense of pride in their community, and also just a greater sense of community because they're going out with their neighbors and their peers, and they're taking care of the park, and they're cleaning up in the park, and they're getting to know the people that they live around. And that creates a safer environment and a safer community for all people. So with that, I will turn it over to Lucas and Tiffany. I believe you all have a brief presentation that sort of describes how PARD plays a critical role in youth programming and how that factors into childcare and other services provided by the city. Lucas, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you for the opportunity. Give me a second to load this up here. Okay. And we'll go full screen. Okay. So I know a lot of times we talk about parks and recreation. The recreation center side of things comes second. But that's one of the more important services and programs that I feel like our department offers. It really does build connections within the community. We have a budget of about $16 million for our community recreation program. About 3/4 of that is allocated to centers that are east of I-35. And with that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about our teen programming. So we, I can't read all my screen because there we go. I moved the cameras. Our teen programming through connection, creating community. A lot of times people refer to our recreation centers as community centers. They are gathering places for youth, for adults, and for teenagers. We focus on designing program objectives that review the impact of equity, meet diversity, and promote inclusion. And there you can see a group of our teens out kayaking on Lady Bird Lake. We provide meaningful programming for teens during out-of-school time to minimize risky behavior. Out-of-school time for us is defined as pretty much just that, anytime they're out of school. So that means after school, when kids are leaving school, we have the ability to go scoop them up from the schools and our part of transportation to bring them to our centers. And then during the summer, we're open from dawn till dusk with our summer camps and drop-in programs. And we're building trust and connections with positive role models in the community. That's not only our staff, but you can see an APD officer there, part of the PALS program. We have Austin code officers come in, we have firefighters come in, and we're engaging and mentoring those teams. And Tiffany, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the developmental assets that we intentionally design into our programs. But there you go.
So yeah, when structuring our programs, quality is number one, especially when it comes to our youth and teen programming. And so we design our programs intentionally to enhance interest, skills, and abilities through quality experiences that support development of social, emotional, ethical, physical, and cognitive competencies. So within that, we adopted the Search Institute 40 developmental assets within our programs. And so we're able to provide an environment in which staff provide positive, supportive roles in their lives. And a lot of the adult support that they receive, many of our participants, depending on their home situations, that may be the only supportive adult that they have an encounter with throughout their day. And then also, whenever young people feel safe, serve others, and perceive that others value them, they can take a healthy risk and try new challenges. And so, in our programs, we like to empower. Lucas, I think if you can go back to the slide, yeah. So within our programs, we still provide empowerment by providing opportunities to serve their community and gain acceptance for their peers. And then by teaching what's admirable and what's not, teaching what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, teaching what's worthwhile and what's not worthwhile, we're able to teach boundaries and expectations positively. Everyday young people face so many different options and choices, and we structure our programs in order to help provide them the support they need to choose wisely. And then also the way that young people spend their time makes a big difference in the way how they grow up. And in out-of-school time programming, it provides an opportunity to learn and develop new skills and interests while positively engaging with other peers and adults. And while our programs are recreational based, we encourage and support the value of education, both academically and also through informal continued learning opportunities. And then by taking learning outside of the atypical classroom setting, we're able to help provide them a way to discover the joy of learning in non-traditional measures, and also sharing their excitement with learning new things. And then the positive values not only help young people avoid risky behaviors, but it also helps to guide their day-to-day actions and interactions. And within our program, we place a value on equity, inclusion, and ensuring that no one feels unsupported or apart from the group. And then also our programs and activities and objectives build social competencies. These skills are needed to interact effectively with each other and also help make difficult decisions in how to cope with new situations. And then lastly, research shows that the more young people have a sense of power, a sense of purpose, worth, and promise, the more likely they are to grow up healthy. And so we provide help support positive identity by having them experience self-resilience, responsibilities, and opportunity to make meaningful contributions within the program and their community.
So here you can see one of our teen events. We have Friday night teen turn up events. They're out swimming, kind of exclusively teen event. This one's at Dove Springs Recreation Center.
And then
Did you-
also with that, I'm sorry, and also with that, we enhance, we also use an evaluation tool in order to measure our program outcomes. And also it helps us to identify any staffing and programming needs by assessing the program environment to ensure that it's safe, it's supportive. And then it also, we assess if the program provides positive interactions and engagement.
So some of our successful teen programs, like I mentioned, the Teen Turn Up event, that's a kind of a once a month Friday night activity. The kids do all kinds of activities from swimming. We had a glow party. We had a silent DJ, kind of using that as a hook to get the teens in, and then directing them into other leadership programs like the Get Real, Teens in Leadership, Totally Cool, Totally Art, which Tiffany operates. Most recently, we're working on the inclusion of a Friday Night Hoops program, kind of again using the sport as a hook, getting the teenagers into the facility, building relationships with them, and then funneling them into some of the successful leadership programs that we have. And through those leadership programs, the next step through that would be teen employment. We do have several of those programs as well. There, we could skip that. There we go. So that's kind of the basics for our teen programming. And you know, I think I read a quote the other day that I felt was kind of appropriate. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, meaning we're making an investment now with teens and giving them the skills they need to succeed is a lot more efficient than some of the other alternatives out there.
Thank you, Lucas and Tiffany. Lucas, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that that's what this conversation is about, right? I think, Andrew, for people like us who sort of live in like the public policy world, right, and are kind of for normie people, if I will, people who do not work in public policy and politics, right? They don't understand kind of the connective tissue between the big ideas of overarching and macro outcomes that you and I spend a lot of time talking about and reading about, and how that actually translates to the dollars that we spend in our City of Austin budget, for instance, on PARD programming, right? And exploring the connective tissue therein is kind of what this conversation is all about. You know, I think Lucas and Tiffany, one thing that you guys didn't mention that I want to mention and kind of like give y'all props for is like one of the things that really matters about PARD's youth programming and summer camps as well is that they are, generally speaking, the affordable options in this city. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that. You know, I think a lot of times people think that social safety nets and entitlement programs are exclusively a conversation that happens in Washington, D.C. and at the federal level, right? But the Parks and Recreation Department is a part of that net in the City of Austin, because you guys overwhelmingly are offering the free and at cost and affordable childcare programs and summer camps that actually allow people, especially from disadvantaged communities economically, to be able to participate in them. So I'm wondering, guys, Lucas and Tiffany, could you guys give us maybe a little more sense of sort of the just the scale of your guys' programming that you do? And ballpark figures are totally fine. We don't need to get into exact numbers, but you know, how many children in like a given month or in a given summer are you guys dealing with? And then also, what's the geographic dispersion of the people that you guys are interacting with through your youth programming?
So I don't want to limit it to just teenagers, because we serve a lot of kids out there over the course of the summer. Typically the kids in our programs are about 2,000 or so a week. You know, obviously we have, that's not a unique number to be able to provide. During the school year, that probably dips a little bit to about 1,500. And that's not really including all the partners that we have. That's just internally us having them come into our structured programs. So that's the number I would have ballpark. Tiffany, you have any other figures out there that you want to provide?
Yeah, I mean, and not only with that, expanding with the partners that we offer, and not just the programs that we offer in-house, we also take our programs even out of house, where we go in to different neighborhoods and find individuals that are not actively participating in program. That's a big part of what our Get Real Roving Leader program is going out and seeking individuals that are not actively currently visiting any of our structured or non-structured programming, and building that relationship with them, and then starting to engage them in activities within our programming, to then introduce them to the staff at the facility, show them what's happening there, and then, not necessarily pass them on, but, realize that they're in better hands and able to engage in some important supportive environments. And then we go back out and find more. And that's a big part of what that program does. And then while still connecting with the youth that we've brought into the recreation centers, they're still engaged with them throughout the whole process as well too. And then going back to the affordability of our program, we've even taken it a step further with offering financial aid and scholarships within our parks department. So any Austin resident that qualifies for free and reduced lunch, you can receive half off of our programs and services that are already at such a reduced rate as is. And then on top of that, you can also qualify for additional scholarship funding through our Scott Johnson Scholarship for up to $300 to be used per child in your household.
It's really great to hear, right? And I think it just sort of underscores this sort of social services aspect of what PAR does. And I think another really important thing to mention, and I was talking to a council member yesterday about this, and he said this, and it was really smart. So now I'm going to steal it, and it's mine. But the dispersion of recreation centers or community centers is one of the more equitable things that the city of Austin has ever done. If you look at the map of where recreation and community centers are, they are in the communities that really need them, which is Austin really putting its money where its mouth is in terms of its priorities, right? And even when we think about the recreation centers that I think those of us who are involved in the parks world really know about and care about, right? The recreation center at Rosewood Park, for instance, one of our oldest and most historic recreation centers, Turner Roberts Recreation Center, which is right there in my Zoom background at Colony Park, right? These are community beacons in generally historically disenfranchised and disadvantaged communities. And this is the city investing in better outcomes there. So not only are you guys providing more affordable services for these communities, but you're also providing the infrastructure there to really make that happen. So I think, Andrew, kind of pivoting to you, right? You mentioned in your presentation how one of the things when we think about school to prison pipelines we're trying to get away from is sort of the negative interactions that students might have in the classroom or outside of the classroom on a school campus, whether that's with school police or with detention or with suspension. Can you pull this thread a little bit more and talk about how more interactions with the Park and Recreation Department, for instance, and with our community and recreation centers is sort of a way to counteract that sort of negative discipline force that sometimes comes into schools?
For sure. I love it because, one, the presentation of Tiffany and Lucas took me back to my teenage years. I spent my childhood in Columbus, Ohio, and was involved in this group called the Columbus Youth Commission, kind of run by the city, kind of engage 13 to 21-year-olds in these civic conversations and just getting them involved in local government initiatives, and just hearing the wide breadth of programs available through PART made me reflect on that time in my life. I think it's of the utmost importance. So yeah, I think not only decreasing the negative impact of school policing and exclusionary discipline being in the broad goal of our education justice project, I think there's one part of this conversation where it's saying defund the police, get rid of school policing, get rid of exclusionary discipline. Then the second part goes to the enhanced capabilities of these services that are being provided. Give more funding to that scholarship program, right? It's wonderful. You get $300 per child under the scholarship program potentially. Let's increase that to 500, to 1,000, right? If we take that money away from APD, which we are seeing through the lived experiences and the anecdotes and this national reckoning that police departments are not providing the safety and security for people in the ways that they have been pitched. Let's give those resources to these proven methods of engagement, like those exemplified by PARD. And I think even more so within the school environment, within school campuses, it's an important conversation. So many school districts throughout Texas, like Austin, have their own internal school police department. You have an AISD police department with over 80 officers and probably at least $1 million dedicated to security and administration of that department within the school district. And just imagine if you took away those resources, right, rededicated them, and said that we are going to increase cooperation between AISD and PARD. We're going to create more extracurricular activities for young people within AISD to engage with the parks within the city and have learned more about the services provided by the city. It feels like you could have limitless possibilities, for development, for career opportunities, for college opportunities for young people. And it's something that we really need to continue to hone on in this revolutionary moment.
Yeah, and so I want to go back, Lucas, you mentioned sort of like PARDS programming versus partner programming, right? And sort of there's an interaction there. So I just want to go back to this sort of idea of PARD playing a role in this broader network and infrastructure of groups that do childcare and programming for youth. Can you talk a little bit about what are those partnerships? Who are they with? What do they look like? I imagine you guys interact with AISD a lot when it comes to like after school care and things like that. And so either Lucas or Tiffany, can you guys just give us a run through of what that looks like?
Sure. Well, PARD is looking to stretch our dollar as far as we can. So we're more than willing and to entertain any partnership offer that aligns with our mission. So we have partnerships with agencies out there that do similar work to us. We engage all the time with Austin Independent School District, Round Rock, ISD, Pflugerville, Del Valley. So it's not limited to just, Austin Independent School District. We entertain homeschool groups. We do it all. I will say that, we have partnerships that range really small to really big. Some of our most successful partnerships, especially with AISD, have been the joint style facilities. So Turner Roberts there in the background, is attached to an elementary school, and we share that facility and that campus with them, which makes it really easy for us to transition the kids from being in school to being in a successful out of school time program. Tiff, you want to add to that?
Sure. And then also, even with our partners, there are times when we offer direct programming within that partnership. So with the Teens and Leadership program that we have partnered with AISD in order to provide leadership development classes, and where our staff go in and basically train them to become recreational professionals with us. And they receive school credit to partake in this. And with that, they go through everything from mock interviews, job readiness type skills, and building resumes, and even doing an internal internship with us, and even completing first aid CPR certifications. And then if they successfully graduate the program with us, they have an opportunity to work with us during the summer with our youth programs called the Summer Playground Program. And so, our partnerships look like so many different things, with all, with the premise of quality youth development, and be it through job readiness, be it through arts and programming, be it through cultural and education. That's what's so neat about Parks, because we span the whole spectrum when it comes to everything. Because I'm also over athletics. So athletic programming, and we also use that as a tool for youth development as well too, when training and preparing people how to learn how to play sports.
So she won't admit it, but she came up through the park system as well. As a youth.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Austin Parks and Recreation, literally. My parents met at Doris Miller Auditorium, And yeah, I'm a Parks and Recreation products. Every leadership skill, every game, every activity from theater. I even learned to play an instrument at Rosewood Park, where I later had a music scholarship in college. So every gambit of who I am is built around recreation.
Uh, it, it's great to hear, but it's also not uncommon, right? I mean, I think
Yeah,
so many
it's not.
people, right? Like one of my most significant experiences ever was going to debate camp in the 6th grade because I was a nerdy dweeb, right? But it took place at a public recreation center, and it was incredibly meaningful and beneficial to me in my long term. So, Tiffany, it's so cool to hear that, right? But also, it must be fun because I imagine you meet people who have very similar stories of like the meaningful nature that the Parks and Recreation Department has played in their lives.
Yeah, and it's like when you dive deep into recreation, from the premise, if you're not really involved with the programming that's involved at the Parks and Recreation Department, you just see everything as fun and games. But then once you dive in deep and really see a lot of the social aspects and social development that we're doing, it goes beyond, everything from the food access programs that we partner with Central Texas Food Bank for providing youth meals. We even provide senior meals. So it's just really neat, all that we do just within a park system.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's so easy, again, in the description of this conversation, we talked about sort of budgets as moral documents, which is this trope that we hear a lot. But I think a lot of times people just think, the Austin Parks Foundation, we will be advocating for more spending in youth programming this year as we do our advocacy, the Austin Parks Foundation, around the budget this year. And I think for so many people, that just sort of looks like a dollar number around the line item. And the purpose of this conversation and many other conversations that we will be having is to really tie those dollars to these long-term outcomes that come from that type of spending. As Lucas said, right? Like, let's spend the money now, let's invest now, because if we don't, we know that will lead to worse outcomes for people, as Andrew has already described, which will be more expensive on the back end. And like we get to spend more money on parks in the process, right? So like everyone's a winner, right? I want to go back to one thing with Lucas and Tiffany, and then Andrew, we will come back to you. But you guys mentioned sort of park professionals, and I think something that not to many people haven't heard, but so some people don't know, right? Like parks professionals is an established profession in the civil service community. It has accreditations, there's academic literature behind it. People invest in higher education around being a parks professional. This is obviously like, as Andrew has said, we are in a revolutionary moment, and I think that's right. And I think for many people, like Andrew and myself, who have come up in sort of more of a public policy realm, this conversation that we're having nationally and in Austin has been a long time coming. Like it was maybe a decade or more ago that I was reading A New Jim Crow. Like these ideas didn't come from nowhere, and they're not new. I'm wondering from y'all's perspective, is this conversation revolutionary from the parks professional perspective? Has this conversation around the school to prison pipeline or social justice outcomes coming from additional spending on the parks, is that something that you guys find yourselves engaging with at conventions with other park professionals or in sort of the park professional literature that exists out there?
Definitely. I mean, I've worked as a park professional for 26 years now, and these are conversations that were had, long before I even started. They were had on the local spectrum, the state, and even our national spectrum through our recreational associations, and even last till today. What's pretty neat is like within our department and also with many departments across the nation, we develop programs for youth and young adults living under, challenging circumstances, including, everything from mental health struggles to homelessness, to engaging in substance abuse. So over the years as park professionals, we've really, positioned ourselves to be leaders in the youth development field, and making sure that we're able to address the needs of youth that have been identified as youth that's at risk. So yeah.
And Lucas, I don't want to not call on you, but so do you have anything to add to that?
I would concur with Tiffany. It's a conversation that as park professionals, we have the probably very first day we're employed. We're always seeking funding to be able to initiate these types of programs. The example of Friday Night Hoops that I provided is very similar to modeled after a national program, Midnight Basketball, that started 20 or 35 years ago. So the concepts are nothing new. From a park standpoint, it's incumbent upon us to be able to sell the benefits of our programs to the community and to the policymakers.
That's absolutely right. And I think a lot more people are realizing this now that didn't before, especially because of COVID and seeing sort of more the importance of parks in their daily life as we're socially distanced, that parks and recreations departments, both here in Austin as well as across the country, are frontline departments, not only as we deal with things like coronavirus, but also when we think about building a more just and equitable world. The Parks Department is absolutely on the front line of that, again, both here in Austin as well as across the country. We are getting to about the time that we need to wrap up. So Andrew, I'm going to throw the last question to you. You have identified that we are in a revolutionary moment. I agree. You and I are the advocates here on this call, right? And we are excited about the possibilities that can come from this. What are you thinking about as we move forward in this moment, as you think about your work on school justice and the school to prison pipeline? What should we be thinking about with regards to the Parks and Recreation budget, best practices that we can do here in Austin that will not only sort of help enhance and strengthen the work that PART is doing, but also lead to the better outcomes that you and your colleagues at Texas Appleseed are seeking?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. So I'd say Austin needs to take a page from the example of Minneapolis, Portland, Columbus, Oakland in particular, disband its internal police department at AISD, right? That would both kind of fit Austin's conception of itself as a liberal and progressive bastion, right, within Texas, and then also could be used to further fortify these fantastic programs that you've heard from PART. Imagine where that money could go, both internally within AISD and in furthering collaboration with other city departments like PART, if they were indeed invested in them, right? So I think attacking the idea that kids need to be policed or surveilled or subjected to security measures is the first thing, and that needs to be an ongoing call. And then also consistently engage in that budget advocacy. Next couple of months will be kind of critical in Austin for the city of Austin budget making process for the upcoming year. And I'd say continually push these policymakers, these city councilors, to really live up to the values that they propose to espouse and really invest in social services and divest from policing and security and surveillance, especially for young people.
I think it's well put, and I'm hopeful that we will make progress on that this budget cycle. Andrew, I'm looking forward to working with y'all on that. We will have more links about everything that we've talked about in the description below, and for people who are eager to get involved in this advocacy work, I encourage you to go to austinparks.org/advocacy to learn more about what Austin Parks Foundation is doing regarding advocacy. Lucas, Tiffany, thank you guys for joining us. The best part of my job is highlighting and celebrating what you guys do at the Parks and Recreation Department. Andrew, it was a pleasure to have you as well. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for the invite.
See you guys.
Thank you.